Well, today is such an exciting day for many reasons. For myself and Pastor Hannah, we've been gone on family vacation for a few weeks. It's been 3 weeks. It feels like 3 months since we've seen you all. So we're so excited to be back. Our kids were so excited to come to church today and to come to VBS this week. And I just want to take a minute and celebrate our amazing volunteer teams over these past few weeks. Don't we have the best volunteers? Man. Whether it was preaching, leading worship, running VBS, let me just pause on that real quick. VBS this week was one of the best VBSs I've ever been to. And we need to give a shout out to Janice Mellett, sitting in the back, who organized it, along with her team of Lynn Jones and Sue Swingle. When I tell you they did an amazing job, they did an amazing job. And the volunteer team surrounding it, I was just blown away at the passion they have for the next generation and pouring into them. So we are celebrating you. We're celebrating these past few weeks and all that God has done. We're also celebrating that today is Baptism Sunday, one of my favorite Sundays out of the whole year. And it's so exciting. We have a group of young kids and teenagers being baptized today. I don't know if I need to tell you this, but it is a privilege to be able to baptize the next generation, to invest in them and to see them making decisions to follow Jesus with their lives. And lastly, I'm so excited that you got your popcorn and you're ready for our At the Movies sermon series this week. We've been talking about this and praying about this for a long time, and I'm excited for this sermon series, doing something a bit different, because we're going to be looking at, over the next 5 weeks, some iconic scenes from iconic movies over the past 30, 40, even 50 years. We're going to look at these stories that have intrigued generations of people, and I think here's what we're going to find as we do it. That many of these stories that resonate so deeply with us in Hollywood have borrowed in some shape or fashion from the greatest story of all, from God's story. Sometimes it's in big ways, sometimes that's in small, subtle ways, but I think what we're going to see, as Pastor Jeff Simmons writes as we explore these scenes, is that the stories of redemption are not isolated to the box office. God set the stage of our very world, and He invites us even today into His story. And so each Sunday we're looking at a scene from an iconic movie. My hope for you is really twofold. One, I hope that you never watch these movies the same way again. I hope you're able to see the message of Christ woven in, oftentimes imperfectly, but woven into these stories. I hope that as you experience the gospel of Jesus in these places, that you see that God is at work even in the places where maybe God on paper is not supposed to be at work. And I hope and pray that this is a tool for you to invite people into our church service on Sunday. That family member, that friend, that neighbor who maybe wouldn't come to church otherwise, but the prospect of eating popcorn during the service and maybe catching a little bit of a movie might be enough to invite them out and say, hey, we'd love for you to come and experience this church service and something a little bit different and new. With that being said, we're kicking off our sermon series with what is, in my opinion, one of the greatest movies of all time. Just by a show of hands, who here has never seen Star Wars? Okay, there's like a handful of people who have never seen it. It's okay if you haven't seen it. I'm going to lay the groundwork, but we're going to start off the sermon series today by watching a scene from one of the greatest movies of all time that a few of you apparently have missed out on. So we're going to turn our attention to the screen. You can bring that up, Cade, whenever you're ready.
Are you all right? What's wrong?
I felt a great disturbance in the force, as if millions of voices suddenly cried out in terror and were suddenly silenced. I fear something terrible has happened. You better get on with your exercises.
Well, you can forget your troubles with those Imperial slugs. I told you I'd outrun them.
Don't everybody thank me at once. Anyway, we should be at all around about 0200 hours.
Now be careful, R2. You made a fair move. Screaming about it can't help you.
Let him have it. It's not wise to upset a Wookiee.
But sir, nobody worries about upsetting a droid.
It's because a droid don't pull people's arms out of their sockets when they lose. Wookiees are known to do that.
I see your point, sir. I suggest a new strategy, R2. Let the Wookiee win.
Remember, a Jedi can feel the Force flowing through him.
You mean it controls your actions?
Partially, but it also obeys your commands.
Hokey religions and ancient weapons are no match for a good blaster at your side, kid.
You don't believe in the Force, do you?
Kid, I've flown from one side of this galaxy to the other. I've seen a lot of strange stuff, but I've never seen anything to make me believe there's one all-powerful force controlling everything. There's no mystical energy field controls my destiny. It's all a lot of simple tricks and nonsense.
I suggest you try it again, Luke. This time, let go your conscious self and act on instinct.
With the blast shield down, I can't even see. How am I supposed to fight?
Your eyes can deceive you. Don't trust them. Stretch out with your feelings. See? You can do it.
I call it luck.
In my experience, there's no such thing as luck.
Look, good against remotes is one thing. Good against the living, that's something else. Looks like we're coming up on Alderaan.
You know, I did feel something. I could almost see the remote.
That's good. You've taken your first step into a larger world.
I don't know if George Lucas, we can bring the lights up. I don't know if George Lucas knew how much he was actually borrowing from Scripture when he created the script for Star Wars, but there's a lot of parallels. For one, you've got the whole virgin birth idea that shows up in Star Wars and someone coming to right the wrongs and redeem the galaxy at large. You've also got these other biblical themes. You've got the classic good versus evil and the story of faith in an unseen cosmic force that gives life and sustains all things. I don't know if George Lucas knew what he was doing when he borrowed these themes, but in repackaging them, he displayed them for generations of people who still watch these movies today. And this scene is really interesting because it kind of lays the groundwork for where the series is going to go. You've got two people that I'm interested in this scene. One, you've got Han Solo, who's this jaded man who believes the belief in the Force is just kind of hokey superstition. He believes that belief in something you can't see is not based on evidence, but is just a coping method in the face of great hardship. And he's come to rely on his own instincts and his own abilities and his own charm to get through difficult situations in life. And then on the other hand, you have Luke. And Luke at this point has experienced tremendous hardship. As an orphan on a backwater planet, he's been raised by his aunt and uncle who suddenly were killed, and then his house is burned down, and then he has to leave the very planet which he grew up from and is forced out into this world that's bigger than he could ever imagine. And as the story progresses, you see the character arc of these two characters. You see Han Solo, who is he's more open to this idea of the Force as it goes along, and then you see the transformation of Luke. And it's so interesting to me, after all the hardship, after all the difficulty he's been through, his faith that like the Force can come in and it can redeem things, it can even redeem his father who has done terrible things, is stronger than ever before. He believes that that the rights can be made, or the wrongs can be made right, and that restoration can come to the galaxy. And I don't know about you, but I read or I watch this movie and I see some parallels to our day and age today. You know, sometimes I look around the world and it just feels darker than ever before. Well, I don't know if that's true. Maybe it's just showing up in different ways, but sometimes it feels darker. Sometimes it feels more unpredictable than ever before. Sometimes it feels like you're just encountering hardship after hardship, difficulty after difficulty, and then you hear about how divided people are. I see stories about wars and economic uncertainty and racism and polarization in our culture. And sometimes in my moments of greatest doubt or worry, I wonder, is there really hope to have an unwavering faith, a resilient faith that comes out on the other side of this stronger? Like in the face of great hardship and difficulty, is it actually possible to believe that there's hope even for the worst of us? But that's the kind of faith I want to have in my life. I want to have a faith that through all the hardship and the difficulties of life comes out stronger. I want to have a stronger faith when I'm 40 than when I'm 34. I want to have a stronger faith when I'm 50 than when I'm 40. I want to have a stronger faith when I'm on my deathbed than when I was younger. But in the face of so much hardship and difficulty and disappointments in life, the question becomes, how do you cultivate that kind of faith? How do you cultivate a faith that grows stronger in the face of hardship, that is resilient and unwavering? Well, to answer that question, we're going to be looking at the book of 2 Kings today. And I want to give you a little bit of context for the book of 2 Kings. See, in our Bibles, they're broken up into 1 Kings and 2 Kings, but really they're one book in the Hebrew Bible, and they're meant to be read from beginning of 1 Kings to the end of 2 Kings. And the story of 1 and 2 Kings is really interesting. It details the slow descent of Israel from their prosperity under King David and their prosperity under King Solomon, and their slow moral decline and their departure from worshiping God as their one true God to ultimately being exiled in Babylon, to the temple being torn down, to the walls around the city of Jerusalem being torn down and burned up. And it seems like when you read 1 and 2 Kings that like for every 2 steps forward the Israelites make, they take 3 steps back. You know, you have one king come in and tear down the Asherah poles and remove pagan shrines. And then you have another king come in and they just kind of double down on everything. They build more temples. They build more high places and more Asherah poles and more places to worship Baal. And in the middle of all this, you have the prophets of God who represent the voice of God, who God has sent out to speak on behalf of God, to call his people back to him. One prophet I want to look at today is the prophet Elisha. And the prophet Elisha had been through 8 different reigns of 8 different kings. So he had been through this whole process, this 2 steps forward, these 3 steps back. He had seen people walking away from God, coming back to God, walking away from God. He'd seen the slow moral decline of the nation of Israel, and I imagine it kept him up at night. It worried him. He had fear that maybe the Israelites wouldn't be able to turn things around. On top of that, Elisha had experienced hardship. He had lost his mentor, Elijah. Not to death, but Elijah had been swept up in a whirlwind and called to heaven. I imagine that losing your mentor is not an easy process. He's been through hardship, he's been through difficulties, and yet, as you look at the story of Elisha, he displays this unwavering, resilient faith. He displays this faith that grows stronger in the face of hardship, not weaker. And so I want to look at one story in the life of Elisha that represents this and look at what does it actually take to grow a resilient, unwavering faith. You can open your Bibles to 2 Kings chapter 6, verse 8 through 23. We'll also have it on the screen for you. And in verse 8, it starts with this. When the king of Aram was at war with Israel, he would confer with his officers and say, "We will mobilize our forces at such and such a place." But immediately Elisha, the man of God, would warn the king of Israel, "Do not go near that place, for the Arameans are planning to mobilize their troops there." So the king of Israel would send word to the place indicated by the man of God. And time and again, Elisha warned the king so that he would be on the alert there. I just want to pause. This really bothered the king of Aram, obviously, because it seems like every time he tried to get the Israelites, every time he tried to catch them off guard, it seemed like they were one step ahead of them. And the only thing he could reason, the only thing he could surmise is that there must be a mole. There must be someone in his inner circle leaking out this information. And so it says in verse 11, the king of Aram became very upset over this. He called his officers together and demanded, "Which of you is the traitor? Who has been informing the king of Israel of my plans?" "It's not us, my lord the king," one of the officers replied. "Elisha the prophet in Israel tells the king of Israel even the words you speak in the privacy of your bedroom. Not that that's creepy or anything. He hears everything you say behind closed doors from miles and miles away." The king of Aram says, "Go and find out where he is so I can send troops to seize him." And the report came back, "Elisha is at Dothan." So one night the king of Aram sent a great army with many chariots and horses to surround the city. And when the servant of the man of God got up early the next morning and went outside, there were troops, horses, and chariots everywhere. "Oh, sir, what will we do now?" the young man cried to Elisha. "Don't be afraid," Elisha told him, "for there are more on our side than theirs." And I can just imagine the servant of Elisha looking left and right for this supposed backup. Like, "Elisha, I know you're a man of God. I know you've done some pretty incredible things, but I don't see any evidence that we're outnumbering this army. We've got you, me, in this little town of Dothan." By the way, archaeology has unearthed what is called Tel Dothan, and we know based on the evidence, it's only a couple dozen houses with a small marketplace and a small wall around it. This is not a big place filled with capable people of fighting a battle. But in spite of their circumstances, in spite of the obstacles in front of them, Elisha seems to see things differently. "Don't be afraid," Elisha told them, "for there are more on our side than on theirs." And then Elisha prayed, "O Lord, open his eyes and let him see." The Lord opened the young man's eyes, and when he looked up, he saw the hillside around Elisha was filled with horses and chariots of fire. Look at this. Despite the overwhelming circumstances that Elisha finds himself in, despite the obstacles in front of him, despite the trials and hardships he's been through in life, he's able to see beyond his present circumstances to a greater reality. It kind of reminds me of that quote we just heard from Obi-Wan. "Your eyes can deceive you. Don't trust them." See, there are really two characters in this story that I want to point out to us. Maybe there's some parallels between Han Solo and Luke in this story. One is the servant of Elisha who can't seem to see past what's directly in front of him. Maybe he's seen God do things, maybe he's seen Elisha do things, but in this present moment, he doesn't see any evidence of God at work. And then you've got Elisha, who despite all that he's gone through, all the obstacles, all the hardships he's faced, he's able to see a greater reality. He sees God's protective hand over him in the face of certain death. And my question for you is, when you hear this story, which person do you find you more identify with? Like, when you read this, do you find that when you face hardship and struggles and obstacles that you're more like the servant of Elisha, unable to see beyond the present circumstances directly in front of you, unable to see beyond the current hardship or the obstacles, or are you like Elisha? You display unshakable faith despite what you may be facing. Every one of us here would love to say that we identify with Elisha. We'd love to say, man, every time I face a hardship, I get on my knees and pray. Every time I go through a hardship, I show up at CityHope, and I start worshiping with my hands held high. But the truth is, many of us have a lot more in common with the servant of Elisha than Elisha himself. Many of us, we face hardships and trials and causes us to question our faith. Or we question God's presence or favor in our lives in that season. And maybe you're going through one of those seasons right now. You've made mistakes or you've had things happen to you and you're like, man, I don't see God at work anywhere in the middle of this. Like, yeah, I know I messed up, but it feels like this season is almost like God's getting back at me. Or maybe I was never in his good graces to begin with. About a week ago, we were camping at a campground, and just about 50 feet from our campsite were these big inflatables that were blown up for the kids to play on. And Henry's 6 years old, and so it felt like he could probably go play on those inflatables. It's close enough I can walk down and check on him if anything's needed. And so Henry went off and he started playing on the inflatables, jumping around, going down slides, and I'd check on him periodically, and he was fine. He was having fun with a bunch of kids there. But then I went down the last time to call him up for dinner, and Henry was sitting on the end of the slide with tears in his eyes, and I said, what happened, buddy? Like, what's going on? And he didn't want to share with me immediately. Nothing. Buddy, you can tell me. What happened? And he said, a boy hit me like this. And he hit me again. And it made me sad and it hurt. You know, as a father, I'm like, where is he and where is his dad? They had left already, and I took Henry back to dinner, and I just felt like I needed to follow up with him the next day. And so I took him on a walk, and I sat down on a bench with him, and I just said, Henry, you know, it makes me really sad when you're hurt. Like when I see you in pain because someone else has hurt you, or maybe you've done something that you're embarrassed about or you don't want to tell me about, that really hurts my feelings. And as your dad, I want to be there. I want to help you. And your mom wants to be there to help you. And so anytime, if someone ever does anything like that to you again, or if you make a mistake and you're worried about it, you can come to me or mommy about this. You can talk to us. We're a safe place. 1 Peter 5:7 says this, cast all your anxiety on him because he cares for you. And I don't know who needs to hear this today, but I get the sense that there was someone in the room who you've forgotten the simple truth that God is a good father. He's a good parent and he cares for you. And oftentimes we find ourselves in these places of hurt. Maybe we've put ourselves there, or maybe someone else has put us there, and we want to hold it tight to our chest. We're scared to bring it to God, but God cares for you. Like a good parent, he sees you in your anxiety, in your distress, and in your worry. He knows about that issue, that problem, that obstacle you're facing, and he doesn't intend to leave you there on your own to figure it out. Psalm 46 says, God is our refuge and strength and ever-present help in times of trouble. And it seems that Elisha, the man of God, understood this. Notice this with Elisha. The very first thing he does when he's confronted by the Aramean army, before even coming up with a game plan or a plan of escape or rallying the people in Dothan to defend the town, he goes to his heavenly Father. The first thing he does is pray. He prays first for his servant who is in great distress, and then for deliverance. Look at what it says in verse 17. Then Elisha prayed, O Lord, open his eyes and let him see. And the Lord opened the young man's eyes. And when he looked up, he saw that the hillside around Elisha was filled with horses and chariots of fire. As the Aramean army advanced toward him, Elisha prayed, O Lord, please make them blind. And so the Lord struck them with blindness as Elisha had asked. I don't know if this bears noting, but maybe it does. This verse is not prescriptive. Okay, it's descriptive, meaning this verse is not something you should pray over people. This is not in here to say, hey, you should pray for blindness over your enemies. This is descriptive. What Elisha does in this moment is representative of what we should do as we work to cultivate a dependency on God. Meaning this, every time we face hardship, every time we face an obstacle, every time we face difficulty, we go immediately to God in prayer. Immediately, the first thing We should have such a dependency on God that before we think of going anywhere else, before we go to any person, before we go into any system, we first approach God with our problems. I can remember Hannah's mom giving us great advice early on in marriage. She said that, when you come together and you get married, the tendency is you're going to want to kind of operate the way you used to operate, meaning when you run into difficulty or hardship or maybe some sort of disagreement, you go to the people that you normally used to go to. So for Hannah and I, like if we went early on in our relationship, if we experienced difficulty, or not necessarily in our relationship, but just in life in general, we go straight to our parents. They were our safe space. They were the place where we could confer with parents and get advice and figure out steps forward. But she said this, when you get married, rather than going to your parents, every time you face difficulty, every time you face hardship, you need to make it the habit of going together. Come to each other with those issues. Come to each other with those disagreements. You can't figure something out, you come to one another. And I think this is kind of maybe a picture, an imperfect one, but a picture of what Elisha is demonstrating here. Before going to anybody else, before coming up with any game plan, before coming up with any plan of escape, he first goes to God. He first goes to God in prayer. It shows the dependency that he's developed and that he's cultivated in God. And it works out in his favor in this instance. In a bizarre turn of events, the Aramean army is blinded, and Elisha approaches them and basically says, hey, you're at the wrong city, and I have come here to lead you to the right city. I don't know how blind they were. I don't know what they were thinking, but they decided to actually follow Elisha where he was leading them. It says this, Elisha went out and said, you've come the wrong way. This isn't the right city. Follow me, and I will take you to the man you are looking for. And they all said, all right, it sounds like a good plan. This seems reliable. And he led them to the city of Samaria. And as soon as they entered Samaria, Elisha prayed, O Lord, now open their eyes and let them see. So the Lord opened their eyes, and they discovered that they were in the middle of Samaria. And when the king of Israel saw them, he brought them right to the king. He shouted to Elisha, my father, should I kill them? Should I kill them? And Elisha amazingly responds, of course not. Elisha replied, do we kill prisoners of war? Give them food and drink and send them home again to their master. And so the king made a great feast for them and then sent them home to their master. After that, the Aramean raiders stayed away from the land of Israel. What is being communicated in this story with a bizarre turn of events at the end? I think part of it is this, that if you will learn to depend on God in every circumstance, it will change the way you interact with the world around you. If you learn to come to God every time you face that hardship, that difficulty, that obstacle, it will change the way you view those hardships, and it will ultimately transform your heart in a way to where you will live and love counterculturally to the culture around you. I mean, for the king of Israel, it made sense. Let's get rid of the threat. Let's kill these men who are out to pillage and destroy your town and ultimately capture and kill you. But Elisha's dependence on God leads him to live and love in a way that nobody had seen in that day and age. See, if you want to cultivate a dependency on Jesus, it will lead you to do incredible things. Suddenly, you'll begin to see disagreements as not a disagreement, but an opportunity to live and love like Jesus. Suddenly, you'll see sitting on the opposite side of the political aisle, not as a threat to you, but an opportunity to live and love like Jesus. Suddenly, you'll see hardships. You'll see moments of crises in your own life as not a moment of deep loss, but an opportunity to grow deeper in your faith and to depend on God more than ever before. Truly, dependency on God changes us. It does what 2 Corinthians says. It makes us a new creation. Paul says this, therefore, if anyone is in Christ, if anyone has that dependency on Christ, he is a new creation. The old is gone, the new has come. And can you imagine if we as a church were so dependent on Jesus, so dependent in the face of hardship and crisis, so dependent on God in the face of overwhelming circumstances. Can you imagine if we were so dependent on God that it transformed us from the inside out? And people looked at us and they said, man, there's something different about that place. They're going through all kinds of stuff, and yet they're still praying. They're worshiping louder than ever before. They're loving their neighbors and their coworkers and their friends, and even the ones that hurt them. They're feeding their enemies. Can you imagine the change that could happen simply by going to God in prayer in each and every circumstance, and the new life that could create in you and I?